Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seattle Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers, and we're talking third week of training camp, and lots to talk about today. And we're going to talk players on the rise, players on the decline. We're going to go over some roster stuff now that we've kind of figured out the starting units overall, and just get you all caught up on the week's news. Keith, talk to me. How you doing? You're really busy. We're kind of fitting this thing into the schedule in between a bunch of stuff, but we're here to talk Seahawks football.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I have spent all of today sitting here on Zoom calls and doing that kind of stuff, and to know that right now for the next little bit, I can sit back, talk Seahawk football with my friend while I enjoy a nice beverage and nice. Relax a little bit. Like, I am so ready for this.
Perfect. I know it's crazy. So I've been noticing the last few days out here in Phoenix that we're starting to get some wildfire smoke and haziness drift in, which happens this time of the year here. But it's really hazy out. It's kind of crazy. So I'm anxious. I'm actually taking off in a couple days. I'm heading up to Lake Tahoe for it's been at least a year since I've gotten away someplace, and so it's going to be kind of nice to get away and for a long weekend with the family, and got my wife's sister and her significant other, and it should be a nice little relaxing getaway. So I need to get this show done and get it produced and out there before I leave. So that's all I have left this week, I think, to do, and then I'm out of here. So. All right, so let's talk some Seahawks stuff. Let's just get right into it. I have some news that you don't know about, and I thought I'd just open it up with that.
Yeah, this is what happens when I spend all day in meetings. I am not up to date on anything that happened today. So
yes, well, you'll know of one of these things if you've been keeping up at all, and then you won't know about the other one at all. So the Seahawks brought in two familiar faces to the BMAC this morning for tryouts, for workouts, not just visits, specifically to take physicals and work out. You probably read about this one in the last couple days. Paul Richardson, wide receiver, 28 years old, former Seattle Seahawks second-round pick, coming off a 5-year, $40 million contract with the Washington Redskins, but he was released in February after only 2 years of that deal. 17 games in 2 years, 48 receptions, 507 yards, 4 TDs. Final year in Seattle after he had a torn ACL in his rookie year, and then a hammy limited him to 1 game in his second year. Came back his third year, had 44 receptions, 703 yards, 6 touchdowns. Paul Richardson coming in to compete, possibly for the third spot role, but possibly just another body in there to compete during camp in the next 10, 15 days, depending on how the wide receiver group washes out. What do you think of that Paul Richardson deal if he comes in on a vet minimum thing and just kind of adds to the pile?
I mean, there is seriously no downside. This guy's got a very long injury issue and all of that.
He's good for about half the games, basically.
Yeah. But when he plays, I mean, the guy's got speed for days. He is just fast. And that's the reason why the Seahawks went and got him when they did in the draft. And when healthy, he's productive. He's very good. The problem is the when healthy part. And,
yeah.
But for having him to come in, for him to be, a chance to come in and compete and whatever. Because what happens if there's an injury? What happens if they go, out here next week and Philip Dorsett, rolls an ankle again and is going to be out for a while. Well, you're going to need a guy. And so just having an extra body and a guy that can be productive in this league is great.
Does that tell you anything at all about the back end of the wide receiver group right now in camp, that they would be looking at a guy like this?
I don't think so, because I'm a little bit, and we can kind of get into that a little bit on the show with what we're talking about. But I think that the wide receiver room is not as deep as they thought. And so you've got obviously talent at the top end and in the middle, but there's been some disappointments at the back end of it. So there may be a little bit, but at the same time, you're not bringing in Richardson to be a back of the roster guy because he doesn't help you on special teams at all. So he's either going to make the roster as a contributor or he is going to...
He's like a Jerron Brown, like seriously, like a third, fourth guy.
Yeah.
Like he'll take reps at the 3 when Dorsett's not feeling it or whatever, there's matchup issues. Or he'll be the fourth guy and he'll come in on 4 wide receiver sets or just rotate in occasionally, get, 8 to 10 snaps a game type of a thing. I would think that would be a perfect role for him. Keep him maybe healthier a little bit longer and add a reliable, set of hands in there when he can play. Again, 17 games over the last 2 years with Washington. But like you said, in those 17 games, he had 48 receptions, 500 yards. 4 touchdowns. I mean, that's not bad for a guy that's not your primary guy. That'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so what I was going to say is I don't think that it matters much because, like I said, he doesn't contribute to special teams. So he either makes the roster in a role where he's going to get reps or he was not going to make the roster. So.
Well, and then Josh Gordon is still sitting out there. We just don't know. And I would imagine if he is reinstated, Seattle will be all over that, given the state of the roster as it stands right now. Okay, the next guy to come in. I'm going to let you have 2 guesses, just for fun. And if you get it, it's no big deal. So your first guess of a former Seahawk brought in to the BMAC this morning to try out.
Well, you already said Gordon is still out there, so it's not going to be him, which would have been my first guess. And having read a thing about this particular player a couple of days ago and the workouts he's been doing, I'm going to guess Justin Britt.
Wow. Nice. Spot on, dude.
Woo, got it. Right.
You got it. Yeah. So Justin Britt shows up at the VMAC this morning, not only just for a visit to say hi, he's actually in there to look at possibly coming back onto the team. He was set to earn $8.5 million this year before being released in April on an injury settlement deal with, I think, paid him probably like $1.2 million, something like that, right? So the cool thing is, if we do bring him back on, this would be cruel to Britt, bring him back on and then cut him in 7 or 8 days, we'd avoid that injury settlement. That would be interesting. But talk about an indictment on the BJ Finning signing. So last week, Keith, we kind of had this banter back and forth, and you were ribbing me a little bit about just creating drama to kind of have an argument on the show. Yes, at the time that was kind of true in a sense. I heard a couple things about this BJ Finney thing, and then I heard about Posick getting reps with the ones, and I was like, what's going on with that? Is that just kind of a rotation thing? They're just moving around a little bit just in case. And turns out the team doesn't really have a lot of confidence in Finney at that center spot, and Posick is like the legit guy right now as a potential starter. And then you add Justin Britt to that mix, and now I'm wondering what the heck's going on with Finney. So let's talk about that a little bit.
So what I've heard with that, because you're right. The last show, I gave you a hard time about it because I'm like, no, they brought in Finney to be the starter. It was no coincidence that they cut Britt the moment they signed Finney because
right.
he was the replacement. I mean, that's who they brought him in for. And you look at his tape and his grades and all of that, like he's just a better player. But from what I'm hearing is that they used a man blocking scheme for the most part in in Pittsburgh where he played, and he has been screwing up the reads in the running game as a zone blocking center, and to the point where the coaches are starting to get frustrated. And so they've moved him out of that spot. They're letting Posick have a lot of reps with the ones, and they're giving, Finney the reps with the twos, but he's also playing some left guard and some right guard just to get reps and to kind of get used to it and to try and get him back up to speed as far as the, getting all that worked out. So that seems to be the thing as of right now. Your attempt to give me a hard time about saying that the line was set is going to turn out to be fairly true. I don't know if the Brit part has anything to do with that, because I think they've been very happy with Posick.
It's kind of good timing in a way with the Brit thing, because he's had a chance to heal from that ACL thing. Potentially more time to heal, as opposed to if this whole thing happens, say in June when they have their normal mini camps and so forth, and they discover that Finney has problems and issues early, it's likely that they would have addressed this issue long ago, until 10 days before the first game or whatever. So it gives Britt a chance to kind of come back. Now the question being, how long does it take Justin Britt to insert himself into the starting lineup if he were to return? I would imagine it would take at least 3 or 4 weeks, because he's needs to get in game shape. He needs to, get reps, all that kind of stuff, get familiarity with the new guys. That's an interesting position to have to just kind of come in and play.
Well, I think there's another part of it with Britt is, one, he's very familiar. So, and with Posick, you've got a guy with a long injury history. And so having him ready to go if they need, I think is going to be a useful part. But the other part is, he's been a soldier for the Seahawks for the last few years. And even when he wasn't playing well, he was still out there and playing and fighting through a lot of really bad play around him. And, he got cut when he was injured and didn't get any traction on the free agent market whatsoever. And so bringing him in at this point, even if it's just for a workout and a physical and all of that, can get his name out there again. It shows other teams that, hey, you should be looking at this guy because he's actually healthy enough to play. So if the Seahawks go, we're going to wait a couple of days and see what happens with Finney, that also gives other teams a chance to come in and sign this guy that the Seahawks have had for a few years. And so it's like kind of doing right by the player and helping him generate a market when he needs one. And I don't have any problem with that whatsoever if that ends up being the case.
I mean, that's an interesting play too.
And if it's not, and he ends up signing, then I think that it tells us that where Finney is at with the learning the zone blocking, they are very quickly giving up on him and going to move on. And that's a very interesting spot. The one thing that I would warn about all of this is, he's been the starter on that line for quite a while, and the starting at center for even longer. And to bring him back in and now ask him to be a backup will be a very difficult sell, not just for him, but for everyone else in the room. And so you are very much messing with the chemistry of that if you ask him to do that. So it would be fairly certain that if they bring him in, it's going to be, we're going to have him start and just take his role back over.
Maybe, but you've reached a point in your career. You're coming off a serious injury. You're starting into camp late. You're probably going to get close to a veteran minimum deal. Maybe a little bit more, because they just want to take care of him. And I would see it initially as a backup role, just in case. And Britt knowing that he's coming off the ACL, knowing that Posick has that injury history, gives him a chance to further heal, get into game shape, be ready to go, 5, 6, 7, 10 games into the season. When the inevitable happens to Posick, he comes in, takes over, and positions himself for next year to get a contract. And that's not a bad scenario either.
Yeah,
All right.
I mean, there's that as well. So,
Okay.
yeah, that is it is an interesting development that Britt was coming back in, and we've talked a lot about the talk about continuity and stuff, and getting a guy like him back, even if he's just a guy on the bench and in the practice room and whatever, it does help with that because he knows this system extremely well. He started at tackle, he started at guard, he started at center. Um, you're not going to find someone who knows the system from a player point of view better than Justin Britt.
So Keith and I are recording in the afternoon on Wednesday, just after the Seahawks finished their second mock game, and so reports have just started coming out. We're not going to report on most of those because we're recording literally at the point where the game ended. So I do know that Jamal Adams had cut his finger a couple days ago and had kind of a club on his hand yesterday during practice. Did not play today. I know there's a few receivers. I think John Ursua was on the sideline along with Dorsett, healing up a little bit. I know that the other guy, not Fane, the other wide receiver that we drafted,
Swain,
sorry. I thought it was Fane. Yeah, he was going to have a good opportunity to come in. I understood that Blair had an awesome game. I don't know the details, but I understand it was standout.
I heard that he had two interceptions, is what I'm looking at right now, both
nice.
of Anthony Gordon.
Ooh, you're cheating. I'm not looking on the web, so whatever you want to report on, that's great. So we were just going to talk today about players on the rise, kind of the roster in general. I think Keith and I have pretty much figured out the starting lineups on both the offense and defense. I thought we'd kind of go over that a little bit and see if there's any debate to be had on that. But we both brought in a list of 5 players on the rise and 5 players that we thought were maybe descending a little bit or on the decline. Not necessarily, forever, but just right now in camp as we stand today, where we're 5 to 7 practices away from cut downs. So we just kind of wanted to get an update there. Keith, why don't you start the conversation about players you think are kind of on the upswing a little bit?
So some player that we've already kind of mentioned here. Let's start with Ethan Posick, who has come in. He's performed well at center. He's shown a mastery of what he needs to do as a center, meaning like the line calls and the mental part of it, which is more important than the physical part, to be honest. But he's done all of that really well and has, at this point pushed BJ Finney out of the starting lineup.
Yeah, I've got him on my list as well for the same reason. I mean, what's not to like? A guy that's been in the system for 3 years, coming into his 4th year, all of a sudden shows up. It kind of reminds you of the Justin Britt thing. Justin Britt played, a couple different spots. They put him at center. All of a sudden, that was kind of a last resort thing. If you remember, it was like, let's try Britt at center and see what happens. And, he won the job and ended up being the center for the next 5 years. So Ethan Posick's in there. I feel pretty good about that. Even though I'm concerned about the injury history with Ethan Posick. I don't have any reservations with him starting out the season being Russell Wilson's snap guy. So that's, to me, I'm thankful somebody stepped up. I mean, if Finney wasn't going to do it and Ethan Posick ended up not doing it, we'd be in a world of hurt right now. So I'm really thankful that Ethan Posick has decided to take the job. I got one, DJ Dallas. Everybody's talking about this kid. Now, I have to give you credit, Keith, where credit is due. You were the first person to talk about DJ Dallas in a positive light. So we came out of the draft. We drafted this kid. I didn't really pay too much attention to him in the draft, to be completely honest. My eyes are all focused on Cam Akers along with everybody else. In that area of the draft, that between the 3rd and the 5th round or whatever. And here's this guy, DJ Dallas, doesn't have overly impressive numbers coming out of college, but they're okay. But he's been mentioned a number of times. Shotty says he's very, very impressive. Clearly the best 3rd down option at running back on the team. And they feel really comfortable with him already, which
Yeah.
is kind of unheard of when you really think about the way that they've treated running backs in the past. I mean, Chris Carson kind of stepped in and kind of won them over, but DJ Dallas is the next guy to
Yeah.
do
And
that.
he's on my list on here. And for that same reason, like the quote that I saw was that he's mastered everything that they need from him in the passing game.
Including picking up the blitz and stuff. Blocking.
Yeah. So basically that right there tells you that he is already lined up to get meaningful snaps
Totally.
in week 1. And that's great for a rookie. You add
And
into the
bad
fact
for
that
Homer.
it's really bad for Homer.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people like Homer, but he's so undersized, and which means he's kind of a one trick guy. He's good he's good in the passing game and on the toss sweep kind of thing, but he isn't going to be the guy that's going to be in there and allow you to run your entire offense. DJ Dallas is, and if he's already at that point in the passing game, there's no reason not to have him be the guy. I mean, because he can run between the tackles in a way that Homer never can. So, yeah, just nothing but great things about him. I keep reading that he keeps finding the end zone in short yardage situations when they do red zone practice, and that a lot of times it's through contact. Like he's getting hit in the backfield and still managing to get forward and get into the end zone, which is a great thing for him and for the team, because that's one of the things that makes Chris Carson so valuable, is that he doesn't have to be blocked perfectly for him to win. And that's a good thing, because it's very rarely blocked perfectly.
And the most important thing for him is he knows how to run routes. And Russell Wilson's really comfortable with that. He knows when to stay flat. He knows when to put a little bit more of a bubble into his route, and he's putting himself in the right positions. The most important factor with that, at least this year right now, is the fact that Pete Carroll trusts him enough to block for Russell Wilson on passing downs. So, and pick up blitzes and stunts. And that's really difficult for a guy to come in and be able to do that. And he studied the playbook, and he is a willing guy to step in, a physical guy to be able to do that. And it's interesting because we've struggled. We had CJ Procise, and then we had DJ McKissick or JD McKissick, excuse me. And then now it's Dallas, and maybe we found a guy that can actually stick in that role for a while and be productive. Because I know that they've wanted that for a long time in that role. Just kind of like they want a really nice, productive tight end. And when Disley went down last year, they really struggled with that for a while until Hollister kind of picked up the slack. DJ Dallas, in the same role as in the running back, receiving out of the backfield, is a safety valve for Wilson, plus design plays, but nonetheless a safety guy to release to when Wilson gets in trouble. And if a guy can really do that job, that really enhances the ability for Seattle to stay on the field and successfully convert third down plays. All right, who's your next guy? Or do you want to do a falling guy?
Yeah, we've already done two guys that are rising. Let's each do guys that are falling.
Sure.
And in fact, I'll just throw out two of them because they play the same position. And one of them, again, we've already talked about, that would be BJ Finney, who has fallen out of the starting lineup and
threatening to fall out of the freaking team.
Yeah, I mean, if Britt ends up being signed, I know that the team is saying that I'm just sorry, I was reading stuff about this while we were started talking, but they're saying they really just were bringing him in to see where he's at in his recovery, because they know that with the ACL, like that he would need to pass a physical and all of that. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. If they do sign him, I would say Finney's probably gone.
Yeah, and they're just going to have to swallow that guaranteed money. Yeah, I think he had $4 million a year, $8 million total. I don't know what the guarantee money is without looking at over the cap right now, and I'm not going to click on it to find out. But I think it was close to $3 million or something like that.
Yeah, so they'd end up eating that. But then the other one would be in the same position, Kyle Fuller, who, if Finney's falling out, Fuller's got an opportunity to step in and compete for a backup spot behind Posick, and he's been hurt. He's been out when he's been in. It hasn't been a great start for him. And then he got hurt and he's been out. And
he's
really,
suspended for the first 2 games of the season.
That's the other part, is that now he's not even going to be around, not even an option for those first 2 games. Really what you're looking at is a guy that his chances of making the roster have gone from slim to 0. And that's too bad for him.
So I didn't have Fuller on my list, but I totally get why he's on that list. I'm going to do a controversial one right off the bat. Players on the decline, not physically, not performance wise, just falling out of opportunities and chances on the roster, and that's Chris Carson. Chris Carson's had some tragedy in his family, a couple of deaths. He's been back east, attending to family issues for quite a while now. I think he's missed like 12 practices at this point, and I'm concerned a little bit for Chris Carson, not physically so much, but mentally. Like what's going on? To have a guy miss time for funerals and so forth is not unheard of. Excuse me, in the NFL, but it is 12 practices, 2 full weeks plus at this point. And it's becoming a little concerning, not only for Chris as a starting running back in the NFL. So he is losing tons and tons of opportunities and reps to mesh with his new offensive line and the other guys, DJ Dallas and I think I'm concerned a little bit. Carlos Hyde, yep. And so it gives Carlos Hyde a huge opportunity, but at the expense of Chris Carson. So what are your thoughts on Chris? What's going on? I don't want to bash the guy because I get it. It's a family thing and that comes first, but it does it does have a reality to it though.
Well, I think a part of there that I think is missing in what you were saying is that when he does return, he doesn't just jump back out on the practice field and get going. He has now to go through a COVID protocol before he can join his teammates. And so he's missed 12 days. And even if he came back, this afternoon, he's going to miss another couple, in order before he's allowed to be out there and play. And it just gets to the point where at what point for week 1, you go, okay, this guy's just not ready. And he's not going to get his normal starters snaps and touches. And they go with the other 2 guys and let them take him. Ultimately, I don't think it's going to matter. Like, does it matter for week 1? Maybe. Does it matter for week 2 and 3 and beyond? No. Chris Carson is still the guy. He's still proven to be an elite running back, and he's still going to, have that opportunity to own his position. But it will matter for the first game, maybe the first 2 games, just because of the time missed and just needing to get up to swing. And as you were saying, there's a new offensive line and all the reads and everything that you got to do. And you just got to get used to it. And he's not getting the reps necessary to do that.
All right. Do you have another one?
I already done 2 down because they were at the same position. So let's go back to up. And I'm going to talk about a guy that was not even on the roster the last time that we recorded a show, and that is defensive tackle PJ Johnson. A guy who was on the practice squad with the Lions and Chargers last year. The Seahawks added him mostly because with Reed and Ford both dealing with injuries and all of that, and Collier is out and Jackson was out, and they just needed more bodies on the defensive line, so they bring this guy in. 315-pound players in his second year, and he's been really disruptive. They've been extremely pleasantly surprised at his ability to, beat guards one-on-one with very active hands and get into the backfield and be disruptive. And the quotes I keep saying, or they keep saying that they may have just found a diamond in the rough, that they just absolutely were not expecting this guy to look like a NFL player. And he is just wowing people. Um,
That's great
and
news because we don't have any tackle depth on this roster right now.
none whatsoever.
Yeah. So PJ Johnson, interesting. I didn't have him on the list, and I didn't because I just didn't know enough about him and to put him on a list like we're putting together. But it totally makes sense. And
Of course, I bring him up and he'll probably get cut tomorrow.
that's right. That is true. Normally, we have 90 players on the roster. Right now we have 80, 79, 80, on any given day. And so guys are getting cut less, like throughout the weeks of practice. I've noticed, like there's a few, but more or less these guys are kind of sticking around and for the whole thing until the final cut down. So it'll be very interesting.
Which I actually expected it to be the opposite. I figured they're used to having 90. Now they've only got 80. So if somebody stubs a toe, it's like, okay, you're not on the roster for the next 2 days, so we can bring someone else in because we need more bodies. I expected there to be a lot of shifting, and there hasn't been.
Interesting.
And so
it makes you wonder what they do going forward. I mean, I know they like their players and they're going to expand the practice squad eventually, more so, permanently down the road. And so it'd be interesting. All right. I'll give you another positive one. I have two. I have a combo, Cody Thompson and John Ursua. And the reason I put them together is because I can't figure out which one's rising the most on any given day. So 3 days ago, it was Cody Thompson. Like he was the guy that was picking everything out of the air. Good red zone target guy coming in like 6'2", 6'3". He's 205 pounds, something like that, on the practice squad last year. And he was kind of the talk of camp as far as making plays from the wide receiver position for the first week and a half or so. He's since not practiced a couple of days in a row because he's healing up on something. And John Ursua has been getting some mentions. In fact, Schottenheimer yesterday singled him out as a guy who's feeling much more comfortable this year in the offense. He's not thinking so much, so he's able to react and use his quickness to be able to create separation, and that's showing up in practice. And it sounded to me like it was to the point where he was pretty well settled in maybe to that prominent slot receiver role with the team where, when they need a guy to come in and produce from that spot, he would be the first man up, which seems like he would be the fifth wide receiver. Like he would be the guy on the roster that's not going to get cut, which is interesting for a couple of the other guys at the tail end. So I just thought I'd mention Ursua.
I didn't have him on my list, but I definitely considered him for that reason. Like he's a guy that, we knew was going to be bubble, right? Is he going to be on the bubble or is he going to be off the bubble? But he was right there. And then basically they're saying that the way he's picked up things, there's literally nothing they can't, or nothing they ask him to do that he can't do. Now they're not going to ask him to be Lockett and get deep because he doesn't have that kind of speed. But as a slot guy, he is performing very, very well, and they really like what they've got in him. And it's starting to sound more and more like this is a guy that's going to make the roster, and I'd be happy to see it. He's got a very interesting skill set.
He was your DJ Dallas last year. Like you really kind of liked him, and he stuck around, and it'd be really nice to know what we have before, we didn't have him. I'd really like to know what's under the hood there with John Ursua and get him out there on the field and actually see him produce to know if he can stick around or not. So I have a conundrum, Keith. I've got 6 remaining players in my risers with only one spot left to choose. So I'm going to have a problem. So I'm going to go to the players on the decline list first. And I also have like 5 players left remaining because I always write down more than I need to just in case. And so now I don't know which guy. Like I've got a couple of guys left that I'm able to talk about. I'm going to talk about Darrell Taylor.
He's on my list as well.
Yeah, Darrell Taylor is a guy that up until 2 weeks ago, we didn't know we were going to have any problems. Nobody's talked about him in the offseason. He was drafted. Everybody's excited about getting him into camp. The Seahawks didn't bring in an outside talent other than Mayoa and Irvin in free agency. And after the draft, really, there was no talk. There was nobody else brought in. Everybody had the expectation that maybe Clowney would come back or we would have a trade. And it just never materialized. So we thought, well, we got Darrell Taylor. That's going to be awesome. Turns out Darrell Taylor's still kind of healing up from his injury he had last year. He had surgery in February, which prevented him from participating in the bowl game and then the lead up to the draft. And we still don't really even know what we have in Darrell Taylor. And that's a problem for this team that's depending on a pass rush to materialize really out of nothing compared to last year. And it's a concern. This same concern, although, put another player on my positive list that I want to talk about next. But Darrell Taylor is a guy that I'm a little concerned about. It's leaning right now to the point where I think he starts the year on the PUP list, and he isn't eligible to come back until week 7.
Yeah, I mean, this is a situation where, as a rookie, he needs the reps. And you look at what happened last year with Collier, where he injured an ankle. He missed a couple weeks of training camp, all 4 preseason games, and even though he was healthy, came back. He didn't have the reps. He wasn't ready to come in and be a contributor at that level, and it really set him back a long way. And now we're looking at a similar situation with Taylor. And actually, if you go back another year and you look at Rasheem Green, you'll notice the same problem. Another guy that looked very promising.
That's really disheartening.
Yep, very promising. At times in camp and preseason, but he got hurt and he missed out on all those reps, and then it kind of became a lost year for him. Now he came back last year and had a much better year and really flashed some potential. And why I think he's going to be the starter at the 5 tech unless Clowney or someone signs. But this will be the 3rd year in a row that the Seahawks have had defensive end coming from the top part of the draft that is missing too much time in training camp, missing out on all those reps, and may end up with a lost year. And that would be really, really unfortunate for both the Seahawks and for Taylor.
That's funny. You mentioned Collier had an anchor last year, and that comment didn't get lost on me. He's being slow and plodding last year compared to what he should have been, which was in shape and ready to go. He just didn't have that opportunity. I had Collier down as kind of my alternate, one of my alternate players among a few to put on this list, and I thought about it a little bit more, and I was like, I got to give him a little bit more time because. They had really good things to say about him early in camp. Haven't heard much since. I think that he's gone from being kind of a legitimate 5 tech option for the team now to a more of a 3 tech only player that's backing up Jerron Reed full time. So I think we're going to see a lot more of Collier inside this year. I think he actually has an opportunity there from that spot to be a little bit more of an opportune player, a disruptor, a guy that's not so dependent on the outside. So we'll see what happens there.
I know where you're going next, because if you go back to the positive side, and since we just talked about Taylor, we can talk about the guy who has stepped up big time, in the absence of Taylor, and is showing, well, really what we've been saying since he was drafted, and that is that Alton Robinson was drafted in the 5th round, but he is not a 5th round talent. He is a 2nd round talent, maybe a 3rd round talent. Nah, he's more of a 2nd round talent. I mean, this guy physically is absolutely gifted. He's also put on, 15
He was drafted
pounds.
at 257 pounds. He's 277, according to Pete Carroll, and he said he hadn't lost a step, but he's just stronger. He's just more manly. He's just a beast. And you look at him. And he's got a back to him like a bull. I mean, his rear and the back of his legs and his calves are that's all I see when I look at him. He's just legs and butt. I mean, it's just kind of crazy, but that's what I see.
you're setting me up for all kinds of
I
jokes
know.
here, and I'm doing my best not to take it and just
Alton Robinson, though, dude. If this guy comes through,
you want to talk about a
right?
guy who is getting so much praise from every coach and player that wants to talk about him. Like everyone's just amazed. I mean, this is a guy with his first step was just pure elite awesome in college, and you add some size and some strength and ability to bull rush people with that, because basically he's going to be able to get in on the body of a tackle before the tackle can set and use
So that's
that.
where I was wondering, you know, they brought him in to be the Leo guy behind Taylor, you know, long term. And it turns out he might have the body to be able to play the 5 tech spot.
Mm-hmm. He's a guy that's going to bounce back and forth, and he'll be a
very valuable.
He'll be a 7 tech against the run and a 5 tech against the pass kind of situation where they can bounce into opposite sides.
Or they'll play him as a speed rusher on the other side occasionally. I mean, you know, because he has that lightning quickness about him. So talk about a really fortunate situation for not only him, but for the team, because we need that. We need him big time, right? And then Taylor being injured, we don't know what we've got there. Maybe he shows up just as good as Alton Robinson. I mean, that would be the absolute dream scenario, right? But Seattle just really hasn't had great pass rushers drafted for as long as I can remember. I mean, we've brought them in via free agency and you know, cuts and all that kind of stuff. And Alton Robinson's going to be a homegrown guy that we can have on the team control for a while. And it's really nice to hear a guy like that be able to turn out. That 5th round, it's like the latest 5th round pick that turns out for Seattle. Alton Robinson. Yeah, he was definitely probably one of my, well, I've got several still. Like, he's one of my top 4 turnout players. You know, I've got several others on the list I'd love to talk about if we have time. Oh, look, we have time. Let's go to one more player on the decline list, though. And I want to get your opinion because, you know, I've got actually 4 more players on my decline list.
I have 3.
You have 3?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to go through them really quick and we can just talk about them. Phil Haynes. And it's nothing that he's done wrong. He just hasn't done enough right yet. And I want to talk about that. Cody Barton. Again, same scenario. He hasn't done anything wrong necessarily, but I think he's just in an overwhelming situation where he's trying to fight through a bunch of talent to get some playing time. Ugo Amadi. Again, it doesn't sound like anything's gone wrong, but I'm not hearing his name. Like, nobody's talking about Ugo Amadi in this camp. Everyone's talking about the other guy I want to talk about on the positive side, which is Marquise Blair. And then Jordan Brooks, same thing. Like, guy comes into camp, he's the number 1 pick. Everyone's raving about his speed and his tenacity and all that stuff. And I'm not hearing anything out of camp about those attributes out of Jordan Brooks. I'm wondering when he's going to show up. So I just want to talk about the guys that I'm concerned about first a little bit. What do you think about Jordan Brooks? Like, are you concerned about any of those guys that you're not hearing any buzz out of camp on those guys?
Not really. I mean, Finney would be, not Finney. Haynes would be the one because there's an opportunity for him and he's not stepping
let's
up
talk about that.
Really taking it.
What's the opportunity for Haynes? Like, what does he have on the line?
Well, I mean, okay, so with Lupati being the guy in front of him, and we know that he is nothing special at all whatsoever. At
this stage of his career.
Yes, I mean, he was a Pro Bowler earlier in his career, but he isn't there. He isn't that anymore. But at this point, I mean, he's an entirely replaceable guy. And if you're a young, talented player at that position, you got to recognize your opportunity, step up and take it, and fight your way onto the field and get out there.
Yeah,
and
I would at least
seen him do that.
I would at least wanting to be able to hear the word fight in relationship to Haynes right now. And I'm not hearing it. I'm not hearing any dog. He's out there competing, you know, through every whistle. He's the last guy out on the field after practice. He's getting, you know, He's trying to, blow guys up after the whistle. Anything. There's nothing at all. Which is frustrating because it seems like he'd be that kind of player.
It sounds like he is still out there with a mindset of, I'm trying to learn. I'm just trying to,
fit in,
make sure that I fit in and I know the offense as well as I possibly can and all of that. But you're in a situation to go get a starting job. Like, go fight for it. And I don't see him doing that. And it's unfortunate. He'll still make the roster. I mean, he's still one of the top 8 linemen.
Right. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. Yeah. These are fine arguments. These are very nuanced. These are not like broad brushstroke type situations where we're writing these guys off. These are just kind of, we wish they were slightly different and we were talking about them in a different light. That's all.
So you mentioned Brooks and Barton. Both the young linebackers on the team. And you're saying, you just haven't
at the
heard
same
much
time,
from him.
Wright is being talked about as a guy that's already secured his spot. I mean, they've already said basically, well, Wright's there. That's it.
True, but I'm going to say that other than that, when they talk about people making plays and doing stuff, have you heard Bobby Wagner's name? Have you heard KJ Wright's name? Have you heard Bruce Irvin's name?
Yeah, I've only heard those guys in the sense that they're consummate pros and they show up and they're mentoring and their leadership qualities are kind of coming out. But no, I don't hear about their everyday practice habits.
Exactly, and that's one of the problems with at the linebacker position when you're doing these things in drills and whatnot is, they're doing coverage drills, but they're not going to wow you the way that a defensive back can because their body type isn't going to allow them to do the same kind of things, and they're going to do pass rush drills and that kind of stuff. But you're going to see the defensive ends really wow in those. The linebackers kind of do everything. And that's kind of all they, so I mean, they have kind of that. And then the other thing is you don't see all the hitting and you don't see all the tackling. And a guy that comes up field and plugs a gap at the line of scrimmage and makes a tackle for no gain there. Well, in practice, you don't come up and hit the guy. You come up and kind of wrap him up and then let go. And so it doesn't come off as a wow play. And so I don't know what Brooks and Barton are doing. And the fact that no one's talking about them, to me, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean the same as like with Haynes or some of the other guys where not hearing their name actually is meaningful because they're in a position where if they were doing really well, we'd be talking about them. You just don't with linebackers. It's just one of those things. It isn't a linebacker situation and training camp where they end up standing out and being
true.
Talked about
But
a lot.
Should a guy like Jordan Brooks be at least attempting to take that job of attempting to get starting reps with the ones? I mean, no, it's not his decision, right? But he should at least be showing some fight there in order to be able to get at least a look or two.
Well, we don't know that he's not. And the other
true, it's very frustrating. This
if the team is
right,
yeah, the team is basically, if they're making the commitment to KJ that KJ is going to be the guy, it's not a bad thing for Brooks to be like, okay, they made the commitment. He's going to start. I am going to learn everything I can learn. I'm going to grind that so that way when I get out on the field, I can make a huge impact and not be.
I hope that's the attitude.
Not have a rookie playbook, but have the full mastery. And maybe that's what's going on there with him. And he's basically assuming that backup role and taking advantage of it, knowing that you've got such a good player above him.
Does it make you think twice about the draft in the way that his position is valued, where he was selected? What other opportunities the Seahawks had on the board at the time to improve themselves in other areas?
I'm not concerned at all because if, this is the last year of KJ in Seattle, as much as that pains me to say. And for this team to be where it's at, contending the way it's at, and to be able to get a guy like Brooks that is going to be the next KJ long term, and let him learn under KJ for a year before asking him to jump in and be the guy. Okay. So you know what I mean? Like I don't have a problem with that.
I think that if Wright gets the nod, and statistics have shown that Wright plays, upwards of 90% of all the snaps in the last 8 or 9 years, right? And he continues to do that this year. Brooks is going to get very little opportunity there at the will. I think maybe this year Brooks has a better opportunity to see the field, being a better linebacker than Bruce Irvin. Bruce Irvin is a linebacker, yes, but I think Bruce Irvin's better role for this team is closer to the line of scrimmage, and maybe Brooks is a better cover guy. Maybe Brooks is a better speed right now. I know Irvin still got some great speed, had great speed coming out of the draft, right? But he's also 32 years old right now. Brooks is a young guy, has tremendous speed at the linebacker spot, and maybe eventually they just can't keep that guy off the field. That's the hope. I mean, you would hope you can't keep your first round pick off the field. Yeah. All right, so let's transition back to the positive group. So
I have one more positive guy.
Okay. Oh, I do. I have more than that, but okay. Ugo Amadi. I want to talk about Ugo Amadi really quick. So Ugo Amadi in the offseason was kind of on the positive list because Pete Carroll talked about him in a light that it was his nickel corner spot to lose. He finished the season last year as the nickel corner, and every indication looked like he would be the guy. Turns out the secret offseason plan that Pete Carroll talked about in February and March ended up being Marquise Blair as the nickel guy, so they could get their best players out on the field. And that was with McDougald still in the fold. And now it's Adams, and they're even better. And now Dunbar's there, and it's just crazy. But so Marquise Blair, so Ugo Amadi first. I'm a little concerned because he didn't really step up, or maybe he has, and we just haven't heard about it. But he's not being talked about at all in camp. He's just another guy, and it's all about Marquise Blair. So Marquise Blair is on my positive list for sure. And he had that big mock game today. Via Greg Bell. And you said he had a couple interceptions in that game today. The whole Marquise Blair showing up thing, along with Adams and Diggs, and you put Griffin in there with Dunbar, and oh my goodness, that secondary dude! I am drooling to see that thing in a game.
Yeah, and Blair deserves to be on that positive list. I mean, he stepped up and done well, but I think what you're seeing is a commitment to the team to try something new, and that's to go to that big nickel with 3 safeties rather than your standard nickel, which has 3 corners.
Well, they're treating him kind of like a corner in a sense that I think he might end up being on the field. Well, I don't think it matters in what they call it.
They play so much. They play a lot of zone, and you're right. In the end, it doesn't matter that much.
They're just putting their best players on the field.
So they're going to a since they play such a zone look, it doesn't matter whether it's a safety or a corner. It's still a defensive back, and they're still responsible for an area of the field. So it works. But going with that, the big nickel versus a small nickel is the reason why they're getting Blair on the field. But you've also got 3 safeties on the team that are
headhunters.
You have 3 safeties on the team that are going to get
great
normal,
cover guys
that are going to get regular playing time. That's it. And if one of those guys gets nicked up or banged up, now you can't play your normal nickel. And that's where Amadi's going to come in. He's a guy that he played some safety, free safety in college, but he's more of a traditional nickel corner. He's going to be that if they need it. If they're not playing,
and they also have Trey Flowers.
If they're not playing, but he's not a nickel corner, right? He's 6'2".
True.
He's an outside corner.
True, but that gives them the option of bringing Diggs down or bringing Dunbar down into the box area.
Yep, and so they have options, but Amadi's going to get an opportunity to come in and play that role. It's just what the team's done philosophically is switch from a standard nickel to a big nickel.
Well, what they've
as
done
their-
from last year is they've switched from Michael Kendricks to Marquise Blair.
Yeah, which is huge. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah, you go from your base defense to a nickel defense, majority of the time, and you kind of realign yourself with the current offenses that you're facing, and it's a better matchup, favorable matchup for the Seahawks to have all those defensive backs back there. I mean, dude, we have probably the best defensive backfield in the entire NFL, top to bottom. Just saying, top to bottom.
I don't know how you can say that someone is competitive with that. I know there are a couple teams that would like to think so, but you're talking about having every player in the starting backfield for the Seahawks is a Pro Bowler.
Or better.
Or better. You've got Adams, who was an All-Pro. But all the other three starters were all Pro Bowlers. And then you look at Blair, who is a second-year player
guy, right?
who is very good in his limited playing time last year. Thought of as, at least within the Seahawks, as a future Pro Bowler and a guy that might make it this year because they really like him and everything that he brings to the field. And we're not even talking about other guys with tons of starting experience that are now going to be sitting back there waiting for their turn. That defensive backfield is loaded, and it's loaded in a way that we haven't seen any team that's that loaded since probably 2013 or maybe 2014 Seattle.
So do you have anybody else on your list?
I do.
I've got three other guys.
So out of
four,
so we said we were going to bring 5 each, and you brought 10.
Pretty much. Yeah.
That's pretty on brand for you, Bill.
I think it's pretty much on brand. I got to be careful because I'm the host, right? So I need to cover all my bases just in case, right? Oh shoot, we've only got 33 minutes recorded on the show. We need to plump this thing up for 30 minutes. What do I talk about?
We're not 33 minutes. We're at 56.
All right, I'm going to quickly mention one more. Jamal Adams. Okay, he's on my positive list. Okay, I don't need to talk about him because everybody knows about Jamal Adams.
How about Shaquem Griffin?
Wow, that's a guy I didn't have on my list, but I actually thought about it for a moment.
Because he is a guy that is basically what he is doing on the field. We talk about people that are making the most of the situation when someone else gets hurt. And Griffin's a guy that is basically showing that he is even better than he looked last year as a pass rusher. He is being very active and using his speed, and he's developed another move besides that interior spin. And the team really likes what he does. I mean, he got pressure on like 13% of his pass rush snaps, which is actually pretty dang good last year. It was just that in the other ones, he got completely washed out of the play. But now they're showing him possibly even having a better pass rush percentage, which would be phenomenal, and doing well. But he's also getting opportunities at linebacker where his speed and athleticism.
You know what? Having a guy like Jamal Adams on the roster gives a guy like Shaquem Griffin a better opportunity to make plays and just be a playmaker. Because you can afford to have Shaquem on the field, maybe at a detriment in the run game, because Adams is so good at coming up and tackling. He's the second best safety tackler in the league. And you give Griffin the opportunity to have some leeway there for some coverage and to be able to rush. I just think it's a good win-win for him to have Jamal Adams there, because Jamal Adams solves a lot of deficiency problems on any defense. And Shaquem, being the player he is, has some deficiencies. You mentioned it. He gets washed out. That's never going to change. He's 227 pounds. He's trying to play an edge, or a linebacker role at that weight. But he's so fast and so quick. He has attributes that the Seahawks dearly need on the field and want on the field. And I think he brings a ton to the game. That's a good pick. I like that upside pick because I've been hearing some good things about him being able to affect the disruption early in camp.
Been hearing a lot of good things about him. And then the other part is we already know that he is an elite special teams player as a gunner, to the point where Nico Thorpe's needs to be worried about his spot, even though he's been the special teams captain out there the last few years. He got hurt last year and didn't play much, and it was Shaquem Griffin that stepped into that role and was an elite player there.
It'll be interesting to find out, Keith, if what they do with Ben Burke-Kirven this year, because I think those two are competing for a roster spot. I think Shaquem Griffin's going to get it. The interesting thing about the practice squad this year is that it's expanded a little bit. You can have a few vet guys on there. You can. I think that Ben Burke-Kirven would probably be a good candidate, I think, for the practice squad. I don't know that he would end up getting picked off. I think teams would view him as being undersized and just kind of a guy at this point. And we'll see what happens there. But
if the Seahawks count Griffin as a defensive end, especially if Taylor starts on the pup,
now that's the key right there.
Then if Taylor starts on the pup,
right,
and Griffin counts as a defensive end and not a linebacker, there might be room for both Ben Burke-Kirven.
Because I've heard good things about Burke-Kirven too. Like he's all over the place making plays right now.
Yeah, another guy who's undersized, mostly a special teams player, but he just shows up all over the field. You don't expect him to be there, but yet there he is, making a tackle on a wide receiver after a 5-yard gain type of situation. It's like, oh, I didn't even realize he was out there, but here he is making a play. And he's going to be a guy that I think the team is they're going to do what they can to keep him if they can. Now, granted, they've got 5 really good players above him on the depth chart. And then you've got Keem Griffin there at the same position in the same role. And so it's going to be hard. You can't keep 7 linebackers. But they don't want to lose either one of them. I think that they're both Keem Griffin
might come down to Nico Thorpe and Ben Burke-Kirven in their eyes.
Or Nick Bellore, the fullback / emergency linebacker / special teams guy, because he doesn't really play the other two.
So I was watching .com the other day and watching the scrimmage, and I'll be darned if I didn't see Nick Bellore lining up at linebacker. Now
you did.
They have him listed as a fullback on the roster. We all know that he's a special teams guy. We know that in the past, his past life, before he came to the Seahawks, he was a linebacker, I think, for Detroit. And so he can play linebacker, but I was surprised. It just caught me off guard. I was like, oh, that's Nick Bellore playing linebacker. So that roster diversity that he has is totally, completely unique. And so who knows what will happen there. They really value that, though.
It's kind of similar to a couple of years ago when they had the big guy who was like 300 pounds that played fullback and then occasionally would line up at defensive end. And I should remember his name, but I don't.
Foa Tui or something like that. I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I've got 3 guys on my list left. I only want to talk about one, so I'll just mention the other 2. Greg Olsen. I thought Greg Olsen. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Greg Olsen's having a great camp and that he is like one of Coach Brian Schottenheimer's favorite players so far in camp right now. And then Brandon Shell, I thought, deserved kind of a little mention. Came in, obviously the presumptive starter at right tackle, but he actually came in and owned it. He came in, did his job, has looked outstanding. Coaches mentioned him without provocation, being provoked, and just kind of bringing him up as a guy who's quicker than they thought, more athletic than they thought, and just jumping right in and being able to take over that spot without them having to worry about it too much.
He came in incredible shape, like better than he in his playing shape last year. And you can tell he spent the extended offseason working hard, and not just physically, but he also spent a considerable time studying and knowing what his responsibilities were going to be and just really understanding everything that was going to be expected of him. So he was ready to go day one, mentally and physically, in a way that I don't think anyone really expected from him. And he's totally owned that spot. There's really hasn't been there hasn't been any mistakes that have caused the team to consider someone else in the position. And there hasn't been, anyone else that's really shown that they deserve
Yeah.
to possibly push him. I mean, he's just been the guy. And that's saying a lot because it's not like Abuhi hasn't played well too. But he looks very much like he's going to be the swing tackle or the backup left tackle since
Yes.
Dwayne Brown's been banged up a little bit. And, you know, the fact that both of
Yeah,
those
he's
guys,
literally the George Fant replacement.
yeah, the fact that both of those guys have come in and been better than advertised, I think is a huge, like, sigh of relief for Seahawk fans at this point. And it needs to happen in a game, not
Yeah.
just practice, but both those guys have been better than advertised. And that's very welcome news.
Did you have one more guy?
You've got all my ups.
Okay.
I've got some downs.
I've got one more up.
Okay. Well,
You can't just not talk about DK Metcalf.
well,
Like,
I don't consider him a riser because he.
dude, I do. And the reason I do is because he's even beyond. He's continuing to go beyond. Like, even where I thought that he would be, knowing that he was going to be like elevated.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian Schottenheimer, I would highly recommend, if you haven't listened to the Brian Schottenheimer news conference that came out yesterday, I would highly recommend that you spend 10 minutes at least listening to the segment on DK Metcalf, because his answer there was absolutely amazing. Like, he literally has a bromance with DK Metcalf.
That's an interesting way to put it, but you're not wrong.
He called him, and he said, DK Metcalf is highly intelligent. He has an expectation and a standard for himself that is higher than anybody else. And he wants to be great. Takes no plays off. He's a tireless worker and he's a clear leader. And he said he has even, in fact, had discussions with DK Metcalf on establishing himself more as a team leader with the team, because he's earned it. He's earned the credentials to be able to speak out and to lead the team, not only just the wide receiver unit, but the team itself, because of that work ethic and that drive and that desire and that clear talent on the field. That combination sets himself apart. And I expect great things from DK Metcalf just based on what I've heard so far and that Brian Schottenheimer thing. Like, to me, that Brian Schottenheimer, because if you really listen to Brian Schottenheimer, he's a great interview guy. He tells it like it is. He comes out and he really talks truth. And he had such good high things to say about a player. It's been a long time since I've heard a coach comment on a player so eloquently that as he did with DK Metcalf. I mean, it was just really amazing. It was amazing.
One of the things that I think is missing from all of the conversation about Metcalf is, yes, he's a leader, and yes, he is that kind of guy, but he is so in exactly the right way. He is not a Terrell Owens or, that kind of diva receiver that is loud and obnoxious and whatever, and he gets fired up and people are like, oh, he's just being a leader and whatever. No, he's more of a quiet leader. The team wants him to be more vocal because they know he has something important to say. But he is just an absolute professional. And you're right. It's hard to do a show like this and not mention him because he's been great in camp. And I think that's been true. But for me, I'm like, we talked about, this isn't just players who've been good. These are risers. And for me, I expected him to be was already sky high. You're not going to go up from that. So, that's the only reason why he's not included in mine. You know what? Tyler Lockett would be another one that deserves to be on there if we're doing it that way, because he's been having a great camp as well. Both those guys, like the Seahawks have some good wide receivers, and I don't know if people are comfortable enough saying that Lockett and Metcalf are both guys that are upper echelon receivers in the NFL. And a lot of people are going to not be comfortable saying that out loud because, you think of Lockett's so small and Metcalf's, only in his second year. And there's questions about, his agility and blah, blah, blah. Both of those guys were insanely productive last year. Lockett's been insanely productive for a few years now, and their talent on both of them is just crazy good. So great picks right there. Like I said, I didn't include them, but great picks. I have 3 guys left on the negative side, and I kind of don't want to end the show on a negative.
We know,
but we kind of did that, so
we can talk.
We know
about
who
them.
they are.
We can talk about them. Let's talk about them real quick. We don't have. It doesn't have to be terribly negative.
No, tight end Luke Wilson is on there for my negative list, mainly
I
just
didn't
because
put him on there because he's just kind of a guy right now.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is he's just a guy. And it's unfortunate. I like Luke Wilson. I thought he was a good draft pick when they got him. It was phenomenal. They were able to bring him back when they did last year, which allowed them to get a 5th round pick for Vanette in the middle of the year. And then you bring in a guy that it's a lateral move for him with Luke Wilson. But Olsen's playing great. Disley's looking good. Parkinson is healing and going to be ready to go, and then Hollister has looked outstanding.
Yeah.
And how many tight ends are you going to keep? Well, you're not going to keep.
You just
5.
named him.
And that means that Luke Wilson's not on the roster, and he hasn't really done anything that stood out that would make anybody go, "Oh, he deserves a spot."
Yeah.
So
he would have to beat out Parkinson. Parkinson could end up, if they want to stash Parkinson and have him on the pup list or whatever. I mean,
if Parkinson makes it to the pup list, then there's a chance for Luke Wilson.
There's a chance, but they probably end up going a different direction.
Yeah, but even if that happens, they still keep 3 tight ends.
I still think they keep 3 tight ends, but they keep 6 wide receivers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then another player that I have, it's really at kind of the same position. Steven Sullivan, tight end wide receiver guy. They said they were going to have him lose weight and play wide receiver, but then he's been lining up at tight end a lot in camp. Hasn't stood out at either position. Really hasn't made the most of the fact that Parkinson's been out.
Right. That's the part. And I think that just shows he's not getting reps. He's not getting the reps because there's too many guys in front of him. And I really do believe that he's destined to be on the practice squad for a year of development.
He's a practice squad guy. I mean, the talent's there, and I really wanted him to step up because he's such a unique athlete, and for the size that he is, I really wanted him to step up and make a case to be that 6th wide receiver / 4th tight end. And I haven't seen anything from him that would make me believe he's done that, and that's disappointing. And then the last one would be David Moore, wide receiver. Guy that's kind of fighting for his life with, Dorsett coming in to take the number 3 snaps. You've got guys like, you can tell we've been talking for over an hour. My brain's starting to go fuzzy.
Ursua,
who's fighting to step up and take the number 4 snaps.
Right.
Moore needs to show that he's.
They're going to bring Paul Richardson in possibly.
Yeah, Moore needs to show that he is taking that next step as an individual, and he hasn't been doing that. He just is out there. He's made a couple plays here and there.
That's exactly the way it's been for 4 years.
But it's been
just what you just said. It's been, he's here, he makes a great play, and then he disappears for 3 or 4 practices, and then he comes back and makes a couple plays. Just enough hint of promise to keep him on the roster, and then,
But not enough. Yeah, like when he earned, all that playing time a couple of years ago, it was, wow, this is a guy that really showed up. And then he disappeared for 8 games, and we didn't see from him. And then he came back for the last couple, and you're like, okay, well, the growing pains, whatever. And then you go to last year, and he kind of did the same thing. He showed up big in a couple of games and then disappeared for long stretches. And he's been doing that this camp. He has had a couple of good practices and has been invisible the rest of the time. And he just can't afford to do that anymore.
And you just don't know. So a lot of things are just not being reported. We're not able to see the practice film of actual routes being run and catches being made or not made, or defensive backs being beat, but maybe he's not getting thrown to. There's a lot of factors that come into situations, especially with so many playmakers.
And not being able to actually go to practice and see that we're dependent so much on the
news media that can't really give
they're
you any
limited
details on
they're
on this
limited
stuff.
on the details. They can say, "Oh, this player looked really good," but they can't say why. Or we're limited to the to the feed, the
The warm
film
up
of,
feed.
and that doesn't show the 11-on-11 portion of practice. We occasionally get to see some 7-on-7s and that kind of stuff, but it's just not the same. So yeah, we're very dependent on other people this year, and so maybe everything that we've had to say in this one, maybe there's big chunks of it that we've missed because of the nature of this year's training camp and the fact that it's not open. We can't go sit on the berm and watch and really dissect everything we're looking at. But I mean, we're doing the best we can here. And I've been those three guys, Wilson, Sullivan, and Moore. I really would have liked to see them find a way to make a case for themselves to make the roster. And I just haven't seen it. Just haven't read about it, haven't heard about it. They've all just been here and been present. And that you need more than that to make this roster. The overall depth of the roster is too good, especially on offense, for just being there to be enough.
So speaking of the roster, I was going to spend a little bit of time today talking about the starters on offense and defense today. I think we're going to run out of time, and maybe we'll save that for another show. In fact, we've got the season prediction show next week because we record right before the roster is finalized. Roster cut down is after we record next week. So we're going to come back the following week and do the roster analysis, and that will be the final show before we start talking about games. So we'll save the roster talk for a couple weeks. Next week's going to be the prediction show. We already had a kind of a prediction show early when the schedule came out, just kind of looking at the schedule, strength of schedule, etc. We're going to get down into nitty gritty next week and talk about the actual predictions. We're going to take a hard look at all the teams that the Seahawks are facing this year. We'll take the COVID-19 into consideration, the fact that Seattle will not have any fans for at least the first 3 games. Other fandoms do have the opportunity to go to their games, although in a very limited capacity. I think we're talking 15 to 20% of fans in some instances and so forth. But is some better than none? What about the crowd noise? Is that going to have any effect or lack of? And how does that come into play? So we'll talk about all that. Anything else, Keith, before we head out?
The only other thing that I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about is that former Seahawk All-Pro safety Earl Thomas is currently without a team. He was cut by the Baltimore Ravens after an altercation with a fellow safety during practice, where Thomas threw a bunch of punches. Apparently, it was a situation where Thomas blew a coverage and the other guy said something to him, and Thomas wanted none of that. And the team didn't cut the young player who no one's ever heard of. They cut the All-Pro, which will give you an idea of what went on
toxicity.
there. Yeah. And then you have the other thing that's come out recently is that he shows up late for meetings all the time. He doesn't take a lot of things seriously. There's been a lot of problems with him in Baltimore.
On and off the field.
And now he's no longer their concern, even though they don't really have a backup for him that's ready to step up. They still, even without a full-time free safety ready to play, they thought they were better without him. And that is really hard to say. Those words just don't fit together well because we're talking about one of the best safeties ever.
Sure.
And
well, I tell you what, no matter what happens or what's done here, his legacy in Seattle is still without question. So he's got that, but maybe he needs to take a little time away from football and focus on the most important things in his world, and come back better able to cope with playing in the NFL.
What it sounds like, and what the stuff that I've read and heard, is that This is a guy who had reached a point where he needed to be humbled a little bit, because he thought he was above the
Well,
team.
that's the
He
clear
thought he was above
message,
that.
isn't it?
And it appears that he is given an opportunity right now to do that. And he will either be humbled by it and come back hungry and appreciative of his opportunity, or he won't. And it'll be like other guys that have reached this point in their career and then they flame out and kind of disappear from the NFL. And I would be so disappointed and so unhappy if that's the route he took.
He's
Earl
always been a
Thomas
fighter.
Is a great player. He is a phenomenal, unique safety. His ability and speed and just his ability to eat up distance and do things that
Reaction.
no other
Right.
safety in the
Anticipation.
NFL can do is crazy. And I've loved watching him his entire career. His entire career. And if this is how it ends, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to say to that. Like, please, Earl, come back. Like, get your head on straight.
Yeah.
Come back. Let me enjoy watching you play the game more. And I say that entirely for selfish reasons. Because damn, this is a very special, talented guy, and it would be so sad if this is how it ends and we don't get to watch Earl play anymore.
Stay tuned. We'll find out. Okay, so let's get out of here. Let's talk about prediction stuff next week and team roster stuff the following week as we preview also the very first game against the Atlanta Falcons on September 13th. So it's coming up, Keith. We're going to be in September next time we record, and game's right around the corner, and we'll get this thing kicked off, and we'll see how far we can get. It's amazing to me that the entire NFL is COVID-19 free since training camps have begun, for the most part, right?
Minus the 68 positive tests.
Yeah,
from
that was kind of nuts. I'm not even going to
the
talk
one
about
lab
that. Yeah, that's crazy.
It sounds like the lab itself was contaminated because,
Right.
yeah, every team that got tested at that lab had like 8+ positive tests one day, and
then they all came back negative. So, crazy. That's disconcerting. Okay, so let's get out of here. Follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. The show's at Hawks Playbook. SeahawksPlaybook.com has all the shows where you can subscribe and listen to every show that we've ever done. We're up to 187. This is the 187 straight weeks without a miss. So anyway, we'll see you next time, Keith. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWSeahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.